letter arrived the day after Mom's funeral, so you can imagine how unsettling it felt to read her name and address in the upper left corner. I checked the postmark because I couldn't believe it had taken the letter 6 days to arrive from just across town. I could have assumed it just got lost in the mail for a few days, but the postmark didn't lie. The letter had only been sent 2 days prior. Mom had already been locked in a drawer, or at least she should have been. Wondering if her lawyer sent it on her behalf, maybe she had addressed the envelope before her ritual suicide, I turned the envelope over and slipped my thumb under the seal. Lightning cracked the sky and thunder tried to crumble it. No rain was falling yet, but it felt close. I could smell sepulchre heavy on the humid air blowing through my living room window. The window let in just enough light for me to make out "Dear Mark" in my mother's disciplined cursive. To read on, I had to turn on a lamp. When I did, my reflection appeared inside of the window. I looked tired. Even though it was 7 in the evening, I set the letter on the arm of my chair and went to the kitchen to make a cup of black tea before committing to reading. Hot tea was one of the few reliable comforts I had left. So then, embraced by my armchair with a steaming mug in my hand, I unfolded Mom's letter. The thunder rolled, rattling the windows as I started to read. Dear Mark, I'm writing this to say goodbye and to clarify my actions. I want to absolve you of any guilt you might be feeling and replace your sadness with the joy that fills my own heart. I am going to be with your dad in just a few minutes. Isn't that incredible? After all this time, we will be together again. I stopped to sip my tea and prepare myself for more tragic lunacy. She could have been making a standard allusion to heaven, but I intrinsically sensed she meant something far less sane. Mom's next sentence vindicated my suspicion. I knew you wouldn't believe me, so I never told you about the Ouija board I found at the thrift store. From the very night I brought it home, it allowed me to talk to your father. One night, he asked if I wanted to see him. I'm sure you can guess my answer. Mom had always been eccentric and leaned heavily into spiritual ideas, but she never really committed to any. Growing up, I remember her claiming Buddhism, Christianity, Taoism, and even Islam briefly, and not always at separate times. She searched for spiritual enlightenment in Kundalini yoga and with compounds like psilocybin. Dad once told me she had been that way as long as he'd known her. He claimed she found the corporeal world boring at best, unmanageably chaotic at worst. She was always looking for a way to make sense of the chaos, to bring meaning to her own existence and, by proxy, mine. I read on. Your dad appeared to me every night after that. He laid next to me as I fell asleep, just as he did in life, but I couldn't touch him. I wanted to badly, but he told me I wasn't ready to yet. Eventually, he told me what I needed to do, and just as soon as I'm done reading this, I'm going to do it. I set my mug down, rested my chin in my palm, and covered my mouth with my fingers. Even if I believed in ghosts, nothing could have convinced me my father encouraged Mom to do what she did. Even if it truly would have reunited them, Dad would not have instructed her to hurt herself. I could not believe Mom maintained the mental capacity to write so clearly before she slit both her wrists and her throat. By the time I found her, she was a pale, sunken version of the woman I'd known my whole life. I continued reading. Although my life on earth is ending, seeing your father has given me hope for what comes after. Please know that I love you and that I can't wait for you to join us too, so we can be a family again. Please don't rush. Life is a wonderful gift, but I don't want to spend it without your father anymore. Goodbye for now, Mom. Goodbye for now, I repeated aloud. She really believed it, so something must have convinced her, but it could not have been Dad. Like I said, he never would have asked Mom to hurt herself or anyone else. Thunder boomed, prompting me to look outside. Watching the trees bow in the wind, I thought of my mother sitting in her house alone on such a stormy night. Insanity had probably been prowling at her doorstep ever since Dad died just over 2 years ago. Sure, I live alone too, but I have the prospect of a family of my own still on the horizon. Poor Mom, all that was behind her. Guilt for not visiting her more often put an unwelcome yet irresistible idea in my head. I felt a powerful urge to visit Mom. Her house anyway. Her memory, maybe. I had not gone inside her house since the day I found her. I was afraid she might still be there, spread out on the floor like she was floating on her own blood. But now, despite the storm, or maybe because of it, I needed to be there with her. I would not let her wait out this storm alone. Mom lived, and died, in a blue townhouse with white trim. Lightning reflected from the upper windows down at me as I walked up the path between Mom's garage and her neighbor's. It made it seem like the house had suddenly awoken. The windows now felt like watchful eyes upon me. I turned my key in the door, the home's mouth, and entered. How a place so cluttered felt entirely empty defied reason. The darkness outside made it even darker inside, and apparently the light bulb in the entryway had burned out. Or maybe the electricity had been shut off, I thought. The air smelled musty and damp, leading me to believe the air conditioner had not run in a while. Good thing I prioritized having cleaners take care of the gruesome mess upstairs after the criminal investigators ruled Mom's death a suicide and cleared the scene. I went around the corner to the stairs and just stood there looking at them for a while, wondering what I was doing. Mom's presence wasn't there the way I expected. That dark, damp house felt wholly disconnected from her, and I started to feel like an intruder. I tried the light switch at the stairs, hoping Mom's aura might return with the light, but that light did not work either. I guessed my theory about the electricity was correct. Mom had been dead less than a week, so she must have been behind on the bill already. Had she hidden financial struggles from me? Struggles so overwhelming they drove her to suicide? I wondered if all the stuff about Dad was nothing more than a macabre fabrication for my sake. But then again, how could she have gone through with the entire ritual if she didn't believe in it? I finally decided to go upstairs, but I didn't want to do it in the dark. I knew Mom kept a flashlight under the kitchen sink, so I went there. Again, I hoped maybe the kitchen would awaken sensations of Mom's presence, but again I was disappointed. The flashlight worked, thankfully. Who knew the last time Mom changed the batteries? Mom's room was the first one upstairs. The doorway faced the top of the stairs. The day I found her, the bottom of her bloody foot was the first thing I saw. And that night, as my sight breached the top of the stairs, I thought I saw her foot again. I retreated down a step and shone the flashlight into her room. My eyes must have tricked me, because the only part of Mom in the light was the dark stain she left in the hardwood floor. The room contained further evidence, reminders of Mom's fatal ritual. The candles she had surrounded herself with lay in a disorganized cluster on her bed, and the bottle of black paint she used to outline a pentagram on the floor stood on her nightstand, still bearing the indentation her thumb had made when she squeezed out the last of the paint. The Ouija board responsible for inspiring Mom to do what she did leaned against the nightstand. For some reason, I picked it up as thunder rumbled outside. "Hello, sweetie," I heard Mom's voice say. The sound came from no particular direction. I started, then peered out of the room. Lightning lit the hallway for a second, and roaring thunder responded, crossfading with the new drumming of heavy rain on the roof. "I'm here, Mark," I heard her say, and this time I knew her voice came from behind me. Spinning around, I saw her. She stood beside her bed with her palms out like Jesus displaying the wounds in his hands, only her wounds hung open on her wrists. So did her throat. Despite these graphic inflictions, Mom was smiling at me. Grinning, really. I pointed the flashlight at her, and like the foot I'd seen from the stairs, she disappeared. But unlike the foot, she reappeared, still grinning, still displaying her gaping wounds, when I removed the halo of light from her direction. Backing toward the door, I put the Ouija board under my arm and grabbed the doorknob. Mom's grin faltered. She said, "We miss you, your father and I." I refused to answer. Something about her didn't feel right. Her apparition made me an instant convert to belief in the paranormal, but I assumed a person's spirit should at least feel somewhat like that person had. The spirit wore Mom's face, but it could not quite mimic her smile. Some subconscious details gave it away. It took a step forward and said, "It's lovely on the other side. We want you to join us. I can show you how." That was all the proof I needed that whatever stood before me was not really my mother. I remembered the line from her letter, "Please don't rush. Life is a wonderful gift." Those had been my mother's true feelings. The ghostly voice I was hearing now might have belonged to her, but the words it carried belonged to something else. I shut the bedroom door, then ran out of the house. Rain fell in droplets so enormous they stung. The two garages provided little cover as I ran to my car and got in. I still had the Ouija board for no better reason than I'd forgotten to leave it. I set it in the passenger seat and stared at it periodically as I drove home, trying to decide what to do next. I didn't know, how could I, if this particular board possessed some special power or if the enemy spirit could have used any old Ouija board to trick Mom. Either way, I felt it had to be destroyed. Reluctantly, I exited into the rain after pulling into my parking stall, taking the board with me. A green dumpster sat at the end of the lot. I ran to it, using the Ouija board as an umbrella to little effect. But when I got there, I couldn't bring myself to toss the board in. Doing so would leave too much to chance. What if somebody went dumpster diving and took the board home? I couldn't bear the responsibility for something like that, so I lifted it above my head again and returned to my car. I wanted to burn the Ouija board because I figured that was the only way to completely destroy it. But with the rain, I could not conceive of any way to start a fire. In the morning, or whenever the storm passed, I would take the board to one of the fire pits down on the beach. Until then, I left it upside down in the back seat of my car. I refused to take it up to my apartment. I live on the second of 3 floors, which means I have noises coming at me from 4 sides most hours of the day. Most of my immediate neighbors, thankfully, go to sleep at reasonable hours, though, so I typically have peace after 10. That night, I walked into my apartment at 9:30, and already the building felt asleep. Not even the kids in 217 were banging around. I ate cold pasta and drank some tea, then took a shower to get ready for bed. Around 11, just as I squirted a slug of toothpaste onto my brush, someone knocked on my apartment door. Wary of anyone who would come knocking so late, I approached the door with caution. The person on the other side knocked again, sharply so as not to cause a deeper sound than necessary. I peered through the peephole. Freckles on a large bald head looked back at me. When the man outside looked up, I recognized his face as one I'd seen frequently in the parking lot. He was wearing a robe too small for him, on top of pajamas that were too large. He was a lanky, awkward-looking guy. I believed he probably meant no harm. When I opened the door, he looked at me grumpily, but then looked past me. "What are you doing down here?" he asked me. "Nothing," I replied. "I was just getting ready for bed. Who are you?" Jim Wendell from 319 right upstairs. Whatever you're banging on down here is shaking my whole apartment. My wife wants to kill you, so you're welcome for me coming myself. I said, Jim, I'm Mark. Nice to meet you, but I swear I just took a shower and I was about to brush my teeth. I'm not doing anything that would shake the floor. You took a shower? Huh. I wonder if it's something with the pipes, maybe. Well, I could tell he didn't know how to end the uncomfortable interaction, or maybe he didn't want to go upstairs to tell his angry wife he had failed to learn the source of the noise. Whatever the reason for his hesitation, I concluded our talk by bidding him good night and shutting the door. But I guess he had more to say, because when I turned my back, Knuckles rapped sharply on the door again. Now I became a little angry and whirled around. But when I opened the door, Jim Wendell wasn't standing on the other side. Looking down the hall, I saw him sauntering toward the stairs. He didn't appear to be hurrying away. Jim, I called to him. He turned around, surprised, and asked, Did you figure out the noise? No, did you just knock on my door again? He stared at me a moment, then asked, After you shut it? Yes, I replied. He shook his head. I looked down the hall in the other direction, but detected no sight nor sound of another person that way. I asked Jim, Did you see anybody? Nope, Jim replied. Closing the door without another word, I turned the deadbolt and set the sliding lock, which I never really used. I use it consistently now, just in case. Then I stood at the peephole for what must have been 2 minutes, waiting to see if anyone would knock again. But once more, the building fell asleep. Still, I felt I could not remove my eye from the peephole. My newfound belief in the paranormal toyed with me, making my mind go places it had apprehensively avoided in the days since finding my mother. As I continued to look out, I heard a knock. It mimicked that of Jim Wendell's, only it did not come from the front door. If it had, I would have felt the vibrations. No, this knock came from my bedroom door. I turned around and saw it had closed. I knew I certainly had not shut it. I didn't even close my bedroom door when I slept. My solitary apartment gave me all the privacy I needed without closing any doors. Someone, or something else, closed the door, and now they, or it, knocked a second time. Thunder rattled the walls without any flashing prelude. I had left my phone beside my bed. I should have grabbed it before answering the door to a stranger late at night, of course, but in such strange moments, thoughts appear out of order. In any case, my phone was behind the closed door. Neither of my available choices appealed to me. I could either accept the invitation to open the door, or leave my apartment to find help. I knew Jim would still be awake. He may not even have made it all the way back to 319 yet. If I found him, I could borrow his phone. Plus, I wouldn't be alone anymore. I undid the bolt and turned the knob, but hit my face on the door when it jerked to a stop. I'd forgotten the slide. When I shut the door to undo it, a drawn-out, metallic groan petrified me. I heard my bedroom door open, and I could feel cold rays of vision on my bare neck. As if by moving slowly I could remain invisible, I turned my head toward the bedroom. Yes, the door had swung open. I could see my useless phone on my nightstand, but no one stood inside. No part of me doubted my senses or questioned my sanity, though. I knew what I had seen, knew what I had heard, and I snatched my keys and left my apartment. I decided I would go find somewhere, a park shelter with a barbecue maybe, where I could burn the Ouija board and be done with it. But my car wouldn't start. When I turned the ignition over, it clicked, then nothing. The battery light appeared on the dash, then slowly faded, dying in a flicker. At that moment, I began to tremble. My car's battery was less than a year old, far too young to fail. Something had drained it. I swiveled the rearview mirror downward to look at the Ouija board. I could have sworn I laid it face down, but the top side faced me now. The dumpster. I eyed it, watching the way the rain shattered and bounced off of its lid. The dumpster was at least 25 feet away from any buildings and therefore likely wouldn't start a deadly fire. Holding my breath, I retrieved the Ouija board and held it like a shield above my head as I darted to the dumpster. Thankfully, the garbage crew came 2 days prior, so only one layer of trash lined the bottom. I tossed the Ouija board in without ceremony. Then I came to what should have been an obvious realization that I possessed no way to light the board on fire. I had a long-nosed lighter in the center console of my car, though. The Ouija board was too far down to reach, so I had to abandon it while I retrieved the lighter. As I crossed the lot, 3 booming knocks rumbled the dumpster. But I stayed true to my mission. When I opened the center console, I was grateful to find a small can of insect repellent as well. I had been hoping the long lighter would reach the Ouija board, but now it wouldn't have to. With the lighter and repellent tucked to my chest, I returned to the dumpster. I raised the lid only enough to slip my hands through, then unleashed a swirling blaze by spraying the repellent through the lighter's small flame. Smoke poured from beneath the lid, limiting my vision, but I glimpsed one of the board's curling edges and grinned. It knocked again, 3 times. The third with enough force to pound the dumpster into me so that after I felt like I'd been kicked in the ribs. The impact caused me to drop both halves of my flamethrower. Fortunately, the flames had already achieved independence. They consumed and belched out the contents of the dumpster to include the cursed board. I probably lost a few years of my life standing in that cloud of smoke, which even the rain could not keep down, but I stayed present until the board was no more. When the flames shrunk to embers, I lifted the dumpster's lid to let the rain put them to rest. Nothing remained of the Ouija board. Assuming I had eradicated my problem, I locked my car and returned to my apartment. It still had an eerie atmosphere even after I turned on the lights, but I figured that would likely linger for at least a few days, like the constant sensation of something crawling on your skin after you've brushed a spider off your arm. For good measure, the next day I found some sage and burned it in my apartment. I read online that it might have positive health effects even if all the supernatural stuff is bunk. It could have just been the smell, but the sage changed the atmosphere enough for me to feel safe again. Several days passed. I occasionally thought of my terrible experience that night after the funeral, but my mind was preoccupied making decisions about Mom's townhouse. It was available to me, of course, but I could never have lived there. One night, while I was up late reading reviews of realtors, I heard a knock at my door. It was Jim Wendell again. "Hey Jim, what's going on?" I asked as I opened the door. "Not sure, Mark. Those sounds are coming from here again." "There's no way," I muttered. Yes there is," Jim retorted. "The kids can't sleep, you're banging around so loud." "Jim, I'm not. Just let me come in and see what's going on," Jim interrupted. My neck stiffened. I studied Jim's eyes for a second. I could not identify what, but something didn't look right with his eyes. "I don't want you to come in," I finally said. "Just leave me alone." "But the noise, Mark," Jim said. Then his frown flattened and curled upward. His lips parted in a wicked grin. The same grin I saw stretched across the face of my mother's ghost. "Get away," I shouted. I slammed the door. The spirit disappeared before I locked the slide. I saw Jim Wendell in the parking lot the next morning and asked if the sounds kept his family up much longer. He looked confused and told me they hadn't heard any noises since the first night he came down to confront me about them. I made 2 conclusions after that. First, destroying the Ouija board did not sever my connection to the demon which haunted me. Second, the demon would stop at nothing to steal my life as it did my mother's. This second notion left me unable to trust any other person or else risk that trust being abused. I tried for some time to just ignore the plaguing spirit. I commanded it to leave in the name of Jesus Christ, but on that night it appeared in a reflection on my microwave in the form of my grinning mother. I saw it from my bed, and after that, I did start closing the bedroom door. Most predators in the wild abandon prey that's too expensive to catch. In other words, if their target seems difficult to capture, they'll often abandon it to conserve their energy with easier prey. I thought the demon, I only call it such for lack of a better term, might behave similarly to a natural predator and give up on me if I refused to acknowledge its bids for my attention. The next night, I came home and saw a light flashing from one of the second-floor apartments. I waited in my car until it stopped. I imagined the demon sulking away like a toddler and felt somewhat powerful. It would take far too long to describe each instance in which the demon appeared as my mother. It never appeared as another person to me again, choosing to torment me instead of attempting to trick me. Its appearances were not limited to my apartment. I saw it seated in the back of my car, standing outside the cemetery when I drove past, in the bathroom mirror at work. I actually wasn't alone that time. One of my coworkers came in while I was washing my hands and went into a stall. Right when his pants slid to the floor, the lights went out. He yelled at me for shutting them off, but my hands were both still under the running water. I looked at the mirror, knowing I would see her, and was not disappointed. She crawled out from one of the ceiling tiles above my coworker's stall and clung like a spider above him. She looked down at him, then smiled greedily at me. I shouted for him to run and abandoned the sink with the water still running. I heard him trip over his own pants and slam into the stall door before I made it out of the restroom. As soon as my feet crossed the divide between the tiled bathroom floor and the carpet, the lights turned back on. My coworker was understandably frustrated by what he interpreted as a dumb prank. After apologizing profusely, I went straight to my boss and requested sick leave for the rest of the day. I drove myself to the hospital and checked myself in for a voluntary mental health hold. My sick day turned into a sick week as the doctors observed me and a psychiatrist evaluated my condition. The demon remained nearby the entire time. I frequently saw it walk by my room, always turning to grin at me as it passed. The psychiatrist diagnosed me as schizophrenic. She prescribed an antipsychotic, and the hospital held me for a few days to observe how the medication affected me. I fully expected the drugs to fail, but since taking the first dose, I have not seen the demon or any visions of my mother even once. I asked if schizophrenia was hereditary and learned it could be. Having a parent with the disorder greatly increases your chances of having it. I've been released for a while now, and I've returned to a fairly normal existence, but I constantly wonder, despite assurances from the therapist I see regularly, whether everything I experienced after Mom's funeral could be blamed on my condition, or if the medication is masking the true reality. I am constantly afraid the sinister spirit is lurking nearby, veiled from my sight by the drugs. My therapist frequently asks if I experience suicidal ideations, and I'm never quite sure how to answer. I don't want to die, but I do sometimes wonder if death is the only way to escape this uncertainty. I don't think I'll act rashly and do something permanent, though, because the only thing that scares me more than what is hidden from me in this world is what lies in wait for me in the next. This affliction, whether a disease or spiritual oppression, took my mother, but I refuse to let it take me. I just hope I can maintain that conviction. After all, as Mom perfectly put it, life is a wonderful gift. You made it out. Congratulations. If you enjoyed the story, please rate, like, review, or subscribe. For ad-free episodes and bonus Into the Woods episodes, become a patron with the link in the description. You can also support the show by buying merch. That link is also in the description below. To stay up to date, follow me on Instagram at The Warning Woods. If you feel ready, meet me here next week for another journey into the Warning Woods. Thank you for listening.